Welcome, dear listeners, to another mystery from the annals of Baker Street. Today we present Sherlock Holmes and the Riddle of the Gilded Gargoyle. A thing of gold and stone, torn from the roof of an ancient house by the Thames, becomes the centre of a mystery in which murder, blackmail, and a vanished cipher are most singularly entwined. Before we begin, tell us where in the world are you listening from. Leave a comment below. Now settle in and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Man with the Gilt Dust. It was upon a November morning in 1893, when London lay muffled beneath one of those yellow fogs which render the familiar streets strange and spectral, that Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves once more together in our old room at Baker Street. A coal fire burned cheerfully upon the hearth. The breakfast things had been cleared away by Mrs. Hudson, save for Holmes's coffee cup, which stood untouched beside a heap of morning papers. My friend reclined upon the settee in his purple dressing-gown, his long, thin fingers pressed together, and his eyes half closed in that attitude of languid absorption which I had learned to read as the prelude to some remarkable burst of activity. For my own part, I had been reading an account in the Gazette of a curious disturbance near the Thames embankment. A watchman employed at Grafton House, an old mansion recently converted into offices, had been discovered dead beneath the roof parapet. Beside him, so the report stated, lay fragments of a gilded gargoyle, an architectural ornament of some antiquity. The police were inclined to view the matter as an accident. I had just remarked upon the oddity of the affair when Mrs. Hudson entered with a card upon her tray. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." He would give no name at first, but at last presented this card. "He seems much agitated." Holmes opened one eye and glanced at the card. "Sir Edmund Vale of Grafton House," said he. "Pray show him up, Mrs. Hudson. Watson, the fog has brought us our gargoyle." A moment later there entered a tall, spare gentleman of perhaps 45, dressed in a dark frock coat of excellent cut, with a silk hat held tightly between gloved hands. His face was pale, his moustache carefully trimmed, and his manner that of a man who had long been accustomed to command others, yet had suddenly found himself in need of aid. Before he had spoken a word, Holmes waved him to a chair. "Pray be seated, Sir Edmund. You have come from Whitehall by way of Fleet Street. You were at Grafton House before breakfast. You have lost, or believe you have lost, a document of some importance. Lastly, you are not here at the suggestion of Scotland Yard, for Inspector Lestrade has already annoyed you by arriving at a conclusion too soon." Our visitor stared. "Not at all. Your left boot carries the reddish mud of the government works near Whitehall, while the right has the blacker grime of Fleet Street, where you stepped down from a cab. The cuff of your right sleeve is powdered with minute particles of gilt. You touch the broken ornament at Grafton House. The inner pocket of your coat has been searched in haste, for the lining is turned. As to Lestrade, no man comes here wearing that particular expression unless the official mind has first declared his trouble commonplace." Sir Edmund drew a long breath. "I was told that you were remarkable, Mr. Holmes. I perceive that the description was insufficient." Holmes bowed without moving from his chair. Sir Edmund looked towards me. "Dr. Watson is my friend and colleague," said Holmes. "You may speak before him as before me." "I am chairman of the Grafton Oriental Trust," began Sir Edmund. "Our offices occupy Grafton House, a Jacobean building near the embankment. It has long been noted for a set of grotesque roof figures, among them a gargoyle covered, at some time in the last century, with gold leaf. Last night our watchman, Abel Cray, was found dead in the inner court. The gilded gargoyle had been torn from the parapet and lay shattered beside him. "An accident?" I asked. So Lestrade declared. Cray, he says, climbed to the roof for some foolish purpose, loosened the figure and fell with it. But Cray was a steady fellow of 60 years, lame in the left leg and fearful of heights. Moreover, something is missing from my private cabinet. Holmes sat up. "A sealed packet," said Sir Edmund. "It contained a memorandum entrusted to me by my late brother, Colonel Peregrine Vale, who served for many years in India. I had meant to deliver it this week to the Foreign Office. I cannot describe its contents fully, but it concerns certain frontier negotiations and the names of men who acted for the Crown in dangerous circumstances. If made public, it would imperil lives and perhaps disturb relations abroad." Holmes's eyes gleamed. Espionage, blackmail, murder, and a gilded monster. The affair presents several points of interest. Who had access to your cabinet? My secretary, Mr. Adrian Pike. Myself. No other. Upon my watch chain until yesterday afternoon. I discovered this morning that the packet was gone. Holmes extended his hand. Sir Edmund hesitated, then handed it over. Holmes examined the chain with his lens. A duplicate has been made. There is a minute scoring upon the ring where the cabinet key hung. Someone pressed it into wax or soft composition while the chain lay unattended. Did you remove your waistcoat yesterday? Sir Edmund flushed. At the Athenaeum. I had spilled coffee and gave the garment to an attendant for brushing. Capital. Watson, make a note of the Athenaeum attendant. Continue, Sir Edmund. There is another matter. Upon the dead man was found a scrap of paper bearing a crude drawing of a gargoyle and the words, "When the gold one speaks, the old debt is paid." Holmes leaned forward. Sir Edmund produced it from his pocketbook. It was a small square of coarse paper, stained at the edge and marked in a bold, uneven hand. Holmes sniffed it, held it to the light, and laid it upon the table. Fish glue, tobacco ash of the black shag variety, and ink too blue for an English office.
Interesting. And the body? At Grafton House still, pending removal. Lestrade awaits the surgeon. Then we shall not keep him waiting. Watson, your hat. The game is afoot. As we descended the stairs, Mrs. Hudson stood in the hall with her apron folded over her hands. "That gentleman, Mr. Holmes," said she, lowering her voice, "left little gold specks upon my clean stair carpet." Excellent, Mrs. Hudson. You have the eye of an official detective, and twice the discretion. The fog received us like a damp yellow curtain. A hansom was summoned, and within minutes we were rattling southward through dim streets where gas lamps showed as blurred halos and the wheels rang upon the cobblestones. Holmes said little, but once I saw him take the scrap of paper from his pocket and smile. "A gargoyle that speaks, Watson," said he. "Stone lips have told secrets before now, but rarely in so theatrical a fashion." Chapter 2. The Corpse in the Court. Grafton House stood in a narrow street between the Strand and the river, its blackened brick front thrusting out above a recessed doorway ornamented with carved beasts and curling vines. It was a sombre place, much older than the bustling offices which hemmed it in, and it seemed to brood under the fog like some survivor of a ruder London. In the inner court, where weeds grew between the stones, we found Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, sharp-featured, alert, and not overjoyed to see my companion. "Ah, Mr. Holmes. Sir Edmund could not rest until he had brought you into it, I suppose?" "A sad accident, Doctor. Nothing more."
Holmes looked up at the roof, where a gap showed in the line of grotesque figures. The body of Abel Cray lay beneath a tarpaulin near the foot of the wall. I knelt to examine him at Holmes's request. He was a wiry man with grizzled whiskers, dressed in the blue serge coat of a watchman. His neck was broken, but there was also a bruise behind the right ear, partly hidden by hair. "This man was struck before he fell," said I. Holmes bent beside me. "A rounded object, heavy but not sharp. The injury would have stunned him, perhaps killed him outright if severe enough." "Precisely. Lestrade, your accident has received the blow upon the skull before selecting its roof." Lestrade frowned. "Not behind the ear, my dear Lestrade, unless masonry has learned to strike sideways. Observe also the hands. Cray's fingers were dirty, but the palms were not torn. His nails contained a gritty substance, pale grey in colour. Holmes scraped a little into an envelope. A man who falls while clutching at a parapet generally leaves his hands in a different condition. Now, the gargoyle. The fragments had been gathered near the wall. They were of carved stone, thickly coated in places with tarnished gold leaf. Holmes examined them one by one. The head had split down the side, revealing a hollow space within. "No. You were searching for commonplace mischance, and naturally you found it. This gargoyle was not solid. There was a cavity inside, sealed by a plug of newer stone." He held up a broken piece. Within it clung a few fibres of rotted silk.
"Something was hidden in it," said Sir Edmund, who had joined us in the court. "Something wrapped in silk," said Holmes, "and removed recently. The edges of this break are fresh, but see here, the plug was loosened earlier. A thin blade has worked round it. There are scratches." Lestrade's face lengthened. "I think Cray found a secret, or was made to appear to have found one." Holmes crossed the court with his long, nervous stride. A narrow iron stair led from the back of the house to the roof. The steps were damp and greasy with soot. Halfway up, Holmes stooped and touched the rail. Fresh paint on an old rail. Black, hastily applied. "Watson, your handkerchief." I gave it him, and he wiped a spot. Beneath the smear lay a bright metallic glint. "Gold dust," said he. "Someone with gilded fingers climbed or descended here." We mounted to the roof. From it the fog hid the river, though we could hear the low hoot of steam upon the water and the creak of unseen barges. The parapet was broad, with grotesque figures crouched at intervals. The missing gargoyle had stood at the north corner, overlooking the court. Its stone base had not broken cleanly, but had been cut around. "A saw?" I suggested. "A fine wire saw, and used with patience. See the parallel marks. The figure was prepared in advance to fall when pulled. Here is the cord mark upon the lead gutter. Someone below, or upon the stair landing, could have dragged it down." "Then Cray did not climb here," said Sir Edmund. The roof was coated with soot and moisture. Holmes pointed to several impressions near the parapet. One set was broad and square, with a patch upon the left sole. Another was narrow and elegant, the mark of a gentleman's boot. "The patched boot may be Cray's," said Lestrade. We returned to the body. The watchman's left boot did indeed show a patch, but the shape did not correspond. Holmes placed a sheet of paper over the sole, rubbed it with a pencil, and compared the impression. "Not Cray's. Our patched friend is younger, heavier, and turns his right foot outward. The gentleman with narrow boots stood near the parapet, but did not approach the broken base. He watched." Sir Edmund gave a start. "My secretary, Adrian Pike, wears narrow boots. He is a neat fellow, always polished." "Then we shall visit him presently. First, the watchman's lodge. The lodge was a small chamber off the passage, smelling of oil, damp wool and tobacco. Upon the table lay a pipe, a lantern, and a dog collar with a brass plate. "Where is the dog?" asked Holmes sharply. Sir Edmund looked surprised. Cray had a terrier, Grip. The animal kept him company at night. I had forgotten. It was not in the court. Lestrade called a constable. The dog, it appeared, had been found locked in a coal cellar, unharmed but silent. Holmes smiled thinly. The dog that did not bark because it had been removed. Yet removed by whom? A stranger would have risked noise and teeth. Someone known to the dog, or someone bearing food. He lifted the pipe and tapped out the ash. Black shag. This agrees with the paper. But Cray's pouch? It contained a milder brown tobacco. Then the ash upon the message was not his. "Watson, we progress." In the corner stood a pair of old boots, cracked and mud-stained. Holmes examined them. Cray's spare pair. No patched sole. Our roof visitor remains at large. From the lodge we passed into the main office, where clerks whispered behind ledgers and glanced at us with frightened curiosity. At the end of a panelled corridor lay Sir Edmund's private room. The cabinet stood beside the mantel, its lock unmarked. Upon the desk were neat papers, a silver inkstand, and a vase holding a single white chrysanthemum. Holmes paused before the flower. "My secretary," said Sir Edmund. "He has a taste for such refinements." He plucked a minute thread from one petal and placed it in his notebook. At that moment the door opened and a young man entered. He was handsome, in a pale, nervous fashion, with fair hair, a pointed chin, and boots polished to a mirror brilliance. His grey gloves were immaculate. "Mr. Pike," said Sir Edmund, "these gentlemen are investigating last night's calamity." Pike bowed, but his eyes flickered towards Holmes and away. Holmes looked at his boots. "Terrible, yes, mudless too. You did not go upon the roof last night." The young man started. Holmes held up the chrysanthemum. "The flower was cut late. Its stem still bleeds. It came from Covent Garden Market before dawn. Your glove has a trace of green upon the thumb. Why return to an office before breakfast with a flower unless you wish to replace one removed during the night?" Pike went white. "I did come early, at 6. Sir Edmund dislikes a bare desk, that is all." Holmes regarded him with sleepy amusement. "Your devotion to decoration is touching. We may speak again." As Pike withdrew, Lestrade whispered, "There is your man." "Perhaps," said Holmes, "or there is a man very anxious to appear interesting." Chapter 3. The Secretary and the Widow. Our inquiries next led us to the small parlour where the staff of Grafton House had gathered under the eye of a constable. There were 6 clerks, a porter, a charwoman, and the dead watchman's widow, a hard-faced woman in rusty black who sat very upright, as though grief itself were a luxury she could not afford. Mrs. Cray's testimony was brief and bitter. Her husband, she said, had been restless for a week. He had received a letter which he would not show her. He had muttered in his sleep of gold teeth in the wall and a gentleman's promise. On the previous evening, he had left their rooms in Lambeth, carrying his old bull's-eye lantern and wearing his best muffler. "Did he speak of money?" asked Holmes. "He said as how a man who kept watch might one day be paid for keeping his eyes open." She compressed her lips. The young secretary, when called back, protested violently. "I never paid Cray a farthing. The fellow was insolent. He spied upon everybody." "Yet he had a letter," said Holmes. "Was it in your hand?" "Would you object to writing the phrase, When the gold one speaks, the old debt is paid. Pike hesitated. Lestrade pounced. The secretary wrote the words with a shaking hand. The letters bore a superficial resemblance to those upon the scrap. Lestrade's eyes shone. Holmes compared the papers. A little too superficial, Lestrade. A disguised hand may imitate carelessness, but it rarely imitates bad spelling consistently. Mr. Pike spells paid correctly. Our anonymous artist wrote it as paid. Pike gave a faint sound of relief. "Still," said Holmes, "you have not been frank with us. Why did you return to the office before dawn?" The secretary's face hardened with shame. Private matters become public with great rapidity when murder walks in the corridor. Sir Edmund broke in sternly. The young man drew a folded envelope from his breast. "It was from Miss Clara Vale, Sir Edmund's niece. We are engaged in understanding, though Sir Edmund would not approve. I had hidden her letter in my desk. Last night I feared it might be found amid the police search." Sir Edmund flushed crimson. Holmes lifted a hand. "Pray postpone the domestic thunder. Mr. Pike's secret may be foolish, but it is not necessarily murderous. Lestrade, you perceive our second shadow upon the blind. It may conceal a thief, or merely two young persons of romantic temperament." Thus was the first suspicion against Pike somewhat shaken, though not removed. Indeed, the secretary's concealment of his dawn visit and his anxious manner furnished Lestrade with ample material for official suspicion. It was our first red herring, though at the time I confess it seemed more substantial. We next examined the porter, a slow man named Hobbs, who stated that he had admitted no visitor after 9 o'clock. Yet Holmes discovered from him, by a series of apparently idle questions, that a side gate opening into a lane was often left bolted but not locked. "And the dog, Grip?" asked Holmes. "Him and me were friends, sir. He would not bark at me, nor at Mr. Pike, nor at Miss Vale when she came with her uncle. Most Tuesdays, sir. She brought flowers for the rooms." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. At noon we called upon Miss Clara Vale at her uncle's house in Kensington. She was a graceful girl of 21, with dark eyes and a composure beyond her years. She received us in a drawing-room where the fire burned low and the fog pressed against the windows like wet wool. Holmes treated her with unusual gentleness. "Miss Vale, we are not here to interfere with your affections. We seek the truth concerning Abel Cray." Her fingers tightened upon a handkerchief. "I knew Mr. Pike had hidden my letter. I begged him to destroy it. My uncle is stern. He thinks Adrian poor and ambitious." "Yes, in the afternoon. I brought chrysanthemums, as I sometimes do." "For a moment, my uncle was not there. I left the flowers." She stared. Holmes nodded. "A club attendant brought the waistcoat back. I remember because he had a scar upon his cheek." "The Athenaeum attendant," I murmured. "No," said she. "This was at Grafton House. He wore no club livery." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Tall, stooping, with reddish whiskers and a scar like a white cord from ear to mouth? He said Sir Edmund had sent him. I thought nothing of it." Sir Edmund, when later questioned, denied sending any such man. "Then," said Holmes as we left Kensington, "our thief had his opportunity to take the key impression." Not at the club, as I first supposed, but under Sir Edmund's own roof. I owe the unknown gentleman an apology for having underestimated his audacity. We proceeded to Lambeth, where Abel Cray had lived in 2 rooms above a pawnbroker. Mrs. Cray admitted us grudgingly. Holmes's search was swift and thorough. In a cracked teapot upon the mantel, he found 3 sovereigns wrapped in paper. Beneath the mattress lay a letter, unsigned, written in the same blue ink as the Gargoyle scrap. It read, "Bring what you found in the Gold Beast to the North Court after the last bell. You shall have the rest then. Speak to no man, least of all Vale." "So Cray did find something," said I. "Or was persuaded that he had," Holmes replied. "Observe, Watson, the paper has been cut with a dull knife. The ink is foreign. The writer smokes black shag. He also employs fish glue, which is common enough among men who mend labels, crates, or certain kinds of theatrical properties. Our circle widens." As we emerged into the street, a ragged boy thrust a folded note into Holmes's hand and vanished into the fog. Holmes opened it and read aloud, "Ask for Jonas Brack at the sign of the Blue Lantern, Limehouse. He knows why the Gargoyle grins." Lestrade would have called it a trap. Holmes called it an invitation. Chapter 4. The Blue Lantern. By late afternoon the fog had thickened, and our cab crept eastward through streets that grew narrower and more noisome with every furlong. Fleet Street's bustle gave way to darker ways, where warehouse walls loomed blankly above us, and the air grew rank with tar, river mud, spices, damp hemp, and the smoke of cheap tobacco. The Blue Lantern proved to be a public house near Limehouse Basin, its sign swinging with a faint groan above a door polished by many rough hands. Within, sailors, lascars, dock labourers, and women in gaudy shawls drank beneath a ceiling browned by years of smoke. Holmes, who had exchanged his usual elegance for the air of a shabby clerk, led the way to the bar. "We seek Jonas Brack," said he. The landlord, a broad man with one clouded eye, looked us over. Holmes placed a coin upon the counter. "And some find them." The coin disappeared. Jonas Brack was a dock worker of powerful build, with shoulders like a dray horse and a patch upon the sole of his right boot. I noticed this at once and felt a thrill of recognition. He sat alone, eating bread and cheese, his face half hidden by a cap. Holmes sat opposite him. "Good evening, Mr. Brack. You were upon the roof of Grafton House last night." The man sprang up, but I had my hand upon my revolver, and Holmes merely looked at him with mild interest. "No, police would begin with a threat. I begin with a fact. Your boot has betrayed you. It is not a moral fault, only a mechanical one." Brack sank back, scowling. He glanced towards the door. "I was paid to help shift a stone figure. That's all. A man told me it was a bit of old ornament sold private. Said it had to come down quiet before the building folk knew. I went up the stair. He'd cut it near through already. We looped a cord and pulled. It fell into the court." "Aye, he came out shouting." Then another gent stepped from the passage and struck him. I heard the crack. Cray went down like a sack. I ran. Fine coat, soft voice, face in a muffler, smelt of violets. "Violets," repeated Holmes. "Noted. And the man who hired you?"
"Scar on his cheek, red whiskers, name of Silas Hobb." Holmes placed another coin upon the table. "You will remain in London. Should you attempt to vanish, Scotland Yard shall hear of your roof climbing before breakfast." Brack nodded sullenly. As we rose, a thin man in a peacoat slipped from the public room into the street. Holmes saw him in the mirror behind the bar. "Our note has borne fruit, Watson. We are observed." We followed at a discreet distance. The man moved swiftly through alleys and along the edge of the basin, where masts stood like a forest of black spears in the fog. At length he entered a warehouse marked with faded letters. Larchen and Company, importers of Eastern curiosities. Holmes tried the side door. It yielded. Within were stacked crates, carved screens, lacquered cabinets, brass idols, and bales wrapped in matting. The smell of dust, camphor, and sea salt filled the air. In a corner stood a workbench upon which lay brushes, pots of adhesive, gold leaf, and fragments of painted plaster. "Fish glue," said Holmes softly. "Gilding tools. The home of our golden dust." A ledger lay open upon the bench. Holmes turned it towards the light of his dark lantern. Grafton House, 1 carved figure. Payment received. S.H. From the shadows above came the faint creak of a board. I looked up and saw a shape move upon the gallery. "Holmes," I whispered. At that instant a crate crashed down where we had stood a moment before. Holmes dragged me aside with astonishing agility. A door slammed. We raced through the warehouse and into a lane, but our quarry had vanished. "Fast fellow," I panted. "And frightened," said Holmes. "Frightened men are useful. They run towards safety, and safety is often more revealing than guilt." We returned to Baker Street after sending a message to Lestrade concerning Jonas Brack. There, Holmes performed a small chemical test upon the grey grit from Cray's nails and the dust from the gargoyle cavity. He heated them in a spoon, added drops from 2 phials, and watched the reaction with keen attention. "Plaster, soot, and a trace of vermilion," said he. "Not roof mortar. It comes from painted theatrical scenery or ornamental restoration. Larchen's warehouse again. Indian silk, old, brittle, dyed with cochineal. The hidden object had lain in the gargoyle for many years. Yet why hide a diplomatic memorandum in a roof beast? Unless the memorandum Sir Edmund lost was not the only secret in Grafton House. Holmes leaned back, his pipe between his fingers. "The riddle is this. Cray was lured to the court because of what he had supposedly found. Brack was hired to bring down the gargoyle. A scarred man arranged the theft of the cabinet packet. A perfumed gentleman struck Cray. Pike hides a love affair. Miss Vale unknowingly witnessed an impostor. And somewhere among these fragments lies a thing worth murder." At that moment Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open.
"From my brother Mycroft," said he. "Watson, when Mycroft stirs, governments tremble." He read it aloud. "Concerning Vale memorandum, extreme delicacy. Come Diogenes Club immediately. Trust no one bearing the sign of St. Mark." Holmes folded the telegram. "The sign of St. Mark, a winged lion, Watson, not far from a gargoyle, if one has imagination." Chapter 5. The Sign of St. Mark. It was one of the peculiarities of Mycroft Holmes that he possessed, without apparent exertion, a knowledge of matters which other men could not have acquired through a lifetime of labour. We found him at the Diogenes Club, seated in his accustomed chair, massive, immovable, and serene, like some great administrative idol before whom the secrets of Europe were daily sacrificed. He greeted us with a lift of one heavy hand. "Sherlock, Dr. Watson, you have been walking in fog and folly." "The atmosphere of London official life," said Holmes. "You mentioned St. Mark." Mycroft's large pale eyes rested upon him. "In 1879, Colonel Peregrine Vale conveyed certain confidential papers from Simla to London. Among them was a cipher key used by a small circle of agents along the northern frontier. One copy vanished. It was believed destroyed. Recently, rumors in Vienna and Constantinople suggest that an old key has reappeared. Men who served under assumed names may be exposed. A memorandum describing the loss and naming those endangered. Unpleasant, but not fatal. The true peril is the cipher key itself. Its old designation was St. Mark, because the first page bore a doodle of a winged lion.
"The gold one speaks," murmured Holmes. Mycroft nodded. Peregrine Vale was eccentric. Before his death, he told his brother that one day the creature upon the roof would give back what pride had hidden. Sir Edmund took this for feverish nonsense. It now seems less nonsensical. A professional intermediary named Silas Hobb, former scene painter, gilder, forger of shipping marks, and occasional servant of foreign interests. He frequents Limehouse. He smokes black shag. Mycroft's lids drooped. "There are several perfumed gentlemen in London, Sherlock. Some serve Her Majesty. Some serve themselves."
A foreign agent would pay. A blackmailer would threaten. A ruined speculator might sell. The Grafton Oriental Trust has enemies. Sir Edmund himself is not beloved.
I could not suppress an exclamation. "I suspect everyone who has proximity to a secret," said Mycroft. "It saves time." Before leaving, Holmes asked one further question. Mycroft's gaze sharpened. "She inherits under her late father's settlement, but Sir Edmund controls the estate until her marriage. Why?" "Because chrysanthemums are seldom innocent, in my experience." From the Diogenes Club we drove to Covent Garden, where Holmes questioned flower sellers until he discovered that 2 bunches of white chrysanthemums had been purchased before dawn by a young gentleman answering Pike's description. That confirmed his account. Yet another seller remembered a scarred man buying a single flower the previous afternoon and laughing that it was for a dead man's desk.
"A theatrical rogue," said Holmes. "He enjoys stage properties." At Scotland Yard we found Lestrade triumphant. Adrian Pike had been arrested. In his lodging had been found a packet of blue foreign ink, a pawn ticket for a gold watch, and a note from Clara Vale, urging him to be cautious. Holmes examined the ink bottle and smiled. "It is blue," said Lestrade. "So is the sky upon rare occasions, but I do not bottle it as evidence. This ink contains aniline dye. The message ink is Prussian blue with gum. As for the pawn ticket, Mr. Pike's debts explain his secrecy, not murder." "He had motive," snapped Lestrade. "He wanted Miss Vale's fortune." "Then why steal a diplomatic packet and dislodge a gargoyle? When a man kills for marriage, he does not usually begin with architecture." Nevertheless, Pike's arrest created a stir in the evening papers, and by 8 o'clock Fleet Street was murmuring of a romantic conspiracy at Grafton House. Sir Edmund, distressed and angry, refused to see Clara. The poor girl sent a note to Baker Street, begging Holmes to clear the man she loved. Holmes read it, then placed it beside the anonymous gargoyle scrap. "Observe, Watson. Clara's hand is firm, generous, open. Pike's is nervous, compressed, vain. The criminal hand is neither. It is a trained hand disguised as ignorance. That is a distinction often missed by men who mistake ugliness for honesty." Near midnight came the second event, which transformed the case from grave to desperate. Mrs. Hudson had retired, the fire was low, and Holmes was seated among chemical apparatus when a violent knocking sounded below. A constable entered, breathless and wet with fog. "From Inspector Lestrade, sir."
There has been another attack at Grafton House." We followed at once. The victim was Mr. Hobbs, the porter, found senseless in the passage by the side gate. He had been struck, though not fatally, and beside him was pinned a card upon which was drawn the same grotesque figure. Beneath it were written the words, "The second mouth ounces at dawn." Holmes turned to Sir Edmund. "Only one gilded, but there are 12 gargoyles in all." Sir Edmund thought. "The small beast above the old counting-room chimney." Holmes looked at his watch. "Dawn is in less than 6 hours. Lestrade, station men at every entrance. Allow no one to leave. Watson, we must inspect the eastern figure." We climbed once more to the roof. The fog was colder now, and the gas lamps below shone dimly through it. The eastern gargoyle crouched above a chimney stack, its mouth open in a leer. Holmes inserted his thin hand into the jaws and withdrew something wrapped in oilskin. Before he could open it, a shot cracked from the darkness. The packet flew from his hand and skittered across the roof. I saw a figure rise near the far parapet, cloaked and muffled, a revolver in hand. Holmes sprang after the packet. The figure fired again. The bullet struck stone, and a splinter cut my cheek. Lestrade shouted below. Footsteps clattered upon iron. The muffled man snatched the packet from the roof, leapt to the adjoining building, and vanished into the fog with a practised agility that no gentleman clerk could have possessed. Holmes stood motionless, staring after him. "Not Pike!" I cried. Chapter 6. The Shadow on the Embankment.
The escape across the roofs of Grafton House marked the beginning of the most anxious night I ever spent in my friend's company. Lestrade's men searched the adjoining premises and discovered only an open trapdoor, a length of black cord, and the imprint of a narrow boot upon a dusty stair. The fugitive had descended through a solicitor's office, passed out by a rear door, and merged with the fog before a whistle could be raised. Holmes seemed neither angered nor dismayed. On the contrary, there was a brightness in his eyes which told me that the audacity of the adversary had touched his sporting instinct. "He risks much," said he, as we stood in the cold court. "Therefore the prize is near. The second mouth opened at dawn because he wished us to open it for him before dawn. He could not safely approach the eastern gargoyle while police watched the house. So he made us his servants." "You mean the attack on Hobbs was staged to bring us here?" "Precisely. Poor Hobbs was struck hard enough to silence him, not to kill. The card was bait. We took it." "With respect, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade sourly, "you took it." "And our friend took the packet. A fair exchange of compliments. Yet he has also shown us his hand. He knew of the eastern gargoyle. He knew we would understand the message. He knew the police disposition. Someone within our circle informs him, or is he himself within it?" Sir Edmund shivered, though whether from cold or fear I could not tell. "We shall know when we recover it," said Holmes. At that moment a cry arose from the lane. One of the constables had found a boy crouching behind a cart, clutching a half-sovereign and trembling with terror. He had been paid to carry a message to a man waiting near Blackfriars Bridge, but had lost courage when he heard the shots. The message was still in his pocket. Holmes opened it beneath a gas lamp. The writing was the familiar disguised hand. "The lion goes to the river. Come alone, or the names are sold before noon." No address followed, only a drawing of a small anchor with 3 bars across the shank. "The anchor mark," said Lestrade. "There are 100 such along the river." "Not with 3 bars," said Holmes. "That is a private wharf mark.
Watson, do you recall the ledger at Larchen's warehouse? Larchen and Company, I answered, importers of Eastern curiosities. Their crates bore an anchor with 3 bars. Our path returns to Limehouse. Lestrade insisted upon bringing men, but Holmes refused to wait for a formal arrangement. Sir Edmund, against our advice, demanded to accompany us. There was something almost feverish in his insistence, and Holmes, after studying him for a moment, consented. Very well, you shall come, but you will obey me in all things. This is no committee room, Sir Edmund. We took a cab as far as the Strand, then another eastward, changing vehicles at Holmes's direction in order to test whether we were followed. On the embankment, the fog thinned a little,
and the river showed itself in black gleams beneath the lamps. Barges moved like shadows. Somewhere a bell told the hour of 3. Holmes suddenly gripped my arm. Behind us, a closed cab with a grey horse. It has turned when we turned. Sir Edmund looked back. Then be grateful. Observation is a disturbing faculty. Our driver whipped up. The cab rattled over the stones, past warehouses and sleeping courts. The pursuing cab quickened also. Twice we turned sharply, and twice the grey horse reappeared. At last Holmes thrust open the trap and gave the driver an instruction. We swerved into a narrow lane, stopped, and Holmes pulled us down before the wheels had ceased moving. We ran through a passage so narrow that our shoulders brushed damp brick. Behind us came the clatter of the other cab halting, then footsteps. A bullet whined against the wall. Sir Edmund stumbled, and I seized his arm. Holmes led us through a gate, across a yard filled with barrels, and out upon a wharf where the Thames lapped blackly below. A small lantern burned at the end of the pier. Beside it stood a man with reddish whiskers and a pale scar along his cheek. "Silas Hobb," said Holmes. The man turned and fled towards a moored boat. I gave chase, but 2 figures rose from behind a stack of crates. One swung a cudgel. I parried the blow with my cane and felt the shock jar my arm. Holmes struck the second man with the butt of his revolver. There was a shout, a splash, and the sound of oars grinding against wood. In the confusion, I saw Sir Edmund move not away from danger, but towards the lantern. A cloaked figure stood there, holding an oilskin packet. For one instant, the light fell upon a gloved hand, a narrow boot, and a white chrysanthemum pinned inside the cloak. Then the lantern was dashed out. Darkness swallowed the wharf. A hand seized my collar from behind. I struggled, slipped upon the wet boards, and found myself dragged towards the edge. Below, the river sucked and slapped at the piles. Holmes's voice rang out somewhere to my left. I dropped. A shot flashed above me. The man who held me cried out and released his grip. I rolled aside, gasping. When a constable's whistle sounded faintly from the street, the wharf erupted into movement. Feet hammered upon planks. A boat pushed off into the river. Holmes sprang to the edge, but the fog closed over the water, hiding all but the dull creak of oars. Sir Edmund was gone. So was the cloaked figure. Upon the wet boards at Holmes's feet lay a single object. It was a small golden scale from the broken Gargoyle, bent almost double, and upon its inner surface, scratched in tiny letters, were the words, St. Mark. Holmes picked it up and held it close to his eyes. "Watson," said he, in a voice so low that I scarcely heard him above the river. "We have been looking at the monster's mouth, when we should have studied its skin." From the darkness downstream came one last sound, faint but unmistakable. It was Sir Edmund Vale calling for help. End of Part 1. Type continue for Part 2. Chapter 7.
The lion goes to the river.
For several moments after that cry had floated to us across the black surface of the Thames, Sherlock Holmes stood as still as one of the carved monsters whose secret had drawn us into so perilous an adventure. The fog moved in pale folds about the piles. The river lapped and sucked with a stealthy sound, as though it too were in league with the fugitives. Holmes did not answer at once. He knelt upon the wet planking and with the aid of a match examined the golden scale which he had picked up from the wharf. Its surface was curved, thin and irregular, like a flake from some ancient armour. Upon the inner side, where no casual eye could have observed it, those two words were scratched with a needle-point. St. Mark. Or driven. There is a distinction, and upon that distinction a man's life may depend. Observe the direction of the oar-strokes. The boat pulled not across the current, but down with it, towards the pool. A man who wished merely to escape would have crossed to the Surrey side. A man who must reach a particular wharf uses the current. Lestrade came running from the lane, his hat awry, and two constables at his heels. "Upon the river," said Holmes. Lestrade swore under his breath. "And I warned you against official triumph over Mr. Pike. We are both wiser for our disappointments. Send men to Wapping Stairs, Limehouse Basin, and the River Police Station. Say that a small boat with 3 men, perhaps 4, has gone downstream. One passenger may be unwilling. Another is a scarred gilder named Silas Hobb. A third is a gentleman who smells of violets and wears narrow boots." Lestrade stared. "I saw enough. Pray move quickly. The fog will do more for him than any accomplice." While the inspector dispatched his men, Holmes turned again to the wharf. He found a smear of mud upon a crate, a torn thread of black cloth upon a splinter, and near the extinguished lantern a crushed chrysanthemum stained with river slime. "The flower again," said I. "Just so. The flower is useful because it is useless. Criminals often carry practical objects: keys, knives, papers, disguises. A flower carried into danger is a declaration of vanity, sentiment, or signal." "I do. Pike carried white chrysanthemums to restore an appearance of order. Miss Vale carried them from affection and habit. Our villain carries one for quite another purpose." Holmes held it to his nose. "Violets beneath the chrysanthemum. A perfumed glove has crushed it. Come, Watson." "To Larchen's warehouse. When a lion goes to the river, one should examine the cage from which he came." We reached the warehouse as the first pallor of dawn began to dilute the fog. Lestrade had left a constable at the door after our former adventure, but the fellow confessed that no one had entered by the front. Holmes, with a dry glance at the numerous side doors, windows, skylights, and river approaches, received the assurance at its true value. Within, the warehouse lay in cold disorder. The crates and lacquered cabinets seemed to crouch beneath their coverings like sleeping beasts. Holmes went directly to the workbench, where we had before observed fish glue, brushes, and gold leaf. The ledger was gone. "Expected," said he, yet the absence pleased him rather than otherwise. He opened drawers, sniffed at bottles, and scraped dried gum from a pallet. At length he drew from beneath a heap of old canvas a narrow strip of silk, faded red and brittle with age. "The wrapper from the first concealment," he said. "Indian silk, as I thought." On the floor beneath the bench were several flakes of gold leaf and a dusting of stone powder. Holmes gathered both. "The gargoyle was not merely broken here, or mended here," he continued. "It was studied here. Hobb had one of its fragments before the murder. That explains the gilded dust upon Sir Edmund's sleeve when he touched the ruins, and upon Mrs. Hudson's stare when he came to us. It also explains why our villain knew there was writing upon the scales. But the words St. Mark were upon the inside of a broken scale. How could he know? He knew enough to search for it. The gargoyle's skin, Watson. Peregrine Vale hid not only a packet in the hollow body. He marked the outer leaves of gold to point to the true hiding place. One scale bears the title, others may bear directions. I looked round at the dim confusion of the warehouse. Then the cipher key is not in the packet taken from the Eastern Gargoyle. I suspect the packet was bait, or part of the path. The true key may have been divided. Colonel Vale had a soldier's caution and a poet's folly, a dangerous combination. Holmes had approached a row of crates bearing the anchor with 3 bars. He tapped them in succession with his cane. At the third he stopped. With a chisel found upon the bench, and no small exertion on my part, we prized up a false bottom. It contained not the missing packet, but a grey frock coat, a muffler, a pair of narrow boots, and a small bottle of violet scent. The boots were smeared with roof soot, and one heel bore a trace of gold dust. "Our gentleman has changed his skin," said Holmes. "He is not careless. Therefore, this is meant to be found, but found too late, after the man beneath these garments has become someone else." Inside the coat pocket lay a visiting card. It bore the name Mr. Lucian Adair, Art Advisor, St. James's. I confess that the name meant little to me, but Holmes's expression altered in an instant. "Lucian Adair," said he. "I have seen that name upon sale catalogues of Eastern antiquities. A man of taste, no fixed fortune, many wealthy acquaintances, and, if I mistake not, a cousin by marriage to the Vale family." At this moment the constable at the entrance called out that a telegram had arrived at Baker Street and had been brought on by a messenger. Holmes opened it and smiled grimly. It was from Mycroft. Adair connected with Balkan Embassy Circle, known at Diogenes as charming, insolvent, and unsafe. Miss Clara Vale sent note to uncle at 2 in the morning. Never delivered. Holmes folded the paper. "There, Watson, is our connection. We have a villain who can enter drawing rooms, understand ciphers, deal with foreign agents, and command men like Hobb. We also have a missing note from Miss Vale. The case is no longer a puzzle of a dead watchman only. It is a race against a sail." Chapter 8. The Trap at Grafton House. By 7 o'clock that morning, London had begun to stir. The fog lifted in reluctant strips from the river, exposing wet roofs, smoking chimneys, and the pale faces of clerks hurrying to their offices with collars turned up against the damp. Yet in our rooms at Baker Street, the atmosphere was one of tense and concentrated purpose. Mrs. Hudson, with the admirable sense which made her invaluable to us, set down coffee, eggs, and toast without a question. Holmes stood before the fire, his violin untouched upon the chair, while Lestrade, haggard and irritated, warmed his hands. Adrian Pike had been released from immediate restraint, though not from suspicion, and came to us in a state of nervous gratitude. Miss Clara Vale arrived soon after, under the escort of her elderly maid. Her face was pale, but her manner was resolute. Holmes addressed her first. "Miss Vale, you sent a note to your uncle in the early hours." "I did, Mr. Holmes. I had received a message, or rather a warning, that Uncle Edmund was in danger if he persisted in concealing what he knew. I sent my maid's brother to Grafton House with a note begging my uncle to trust you entirely. He never returned. This morning I learned he had been found near Charing Cross, drugged but alive. The note was gone." Holmes nodded. Thus our adversary learned that Sir Edmund might be brought to confession. Very good. Now, Mr. Pike, you will write another note, not to Miss Vale, but in her hand. Pike stared. With her permission, and under her eye, it must say that the last scale of the golden beast remains in Sir Edmund's private cabinet, and that without it, the foreign buyer cannot read St. Mark. It must add that Sir Edmund, half delirious and in hiding, has sent word that he will surrender it only to Miss Vale at Grafton House tonight. Lestrade slapped his knee. A trap baited with vanity and necessity, said Holmes. Adair believes himself the only clever man in London. We shall oblige him with evidence that others are foolish. Miss Vale looked at Holmes steadily. Holmes's face softened. I believe so. Dead men cannot tell where the final scale lies. If Adair needed only the packet, Sir Edmund's cry upon the river would not have sounded as it did. It was a cry of fear, not death. You shall appear to help. There is a difference. Watson will accompany you in the cab as far as Grafton House, but you will not enter. Mrs. Hudson has a bonnet and veil of sufficient dignity. With suitable padding and a little courage, I shall be Miss Clara Vale. Lestrade gave a snort despite himself. Holmes continued, unperturbed. Mr. Pike will remain visibly at Baker Street, lest Adair suppose a lover's rescue is in motion. Lestrade will place men in the lane, the court and the roof stair, but not so close as to frighten our bird. Watson will be in the counting room with a revolver. I shall be in Sir Edmund's private room. And the cabinet? Asked Lestrade. Holmes selected from his desk several blank papers, wrapped them in oilskin, and added the golden scale marked St. Mark. He then took a second scale of dull brass from a tray, a little gilt powder, a scratched arrow, and our forgery will tempt a hungry mind. Adair must believe there is a last direction yet unknown. The day passed in preparations. Holmes visited Grafton House in the guise of an elderly surveyor and examined the routes by which an intruder might enter. He found, beneath a loose flagstone in the side lane, a small packet of black wax, a coil of fine cord, and a duplicate key to the side gate. "Hobbs' store," he said. "Our man lays tools as a chess player lays pieces." At dusk the trap was set. The fog returned with the lamps, softer than before, but still sufficient to blur the farther side of the street. Grafton House loomed black and damp. Lestrade's men vanished into doorways and behind carts. I sat beside the veiled figure in the cab, and though I knew it to be Holmes, his transformation was so complete that I could scarce suppress my admiration. The bowed head, the gloved hands, the slight tremor of feminine distress, all were perfect. At the entrance, the figure alighted. "Remain here, doctor," murmured Holmes, in a voice which was no longer his own. "For 3 minutes only, then to the counting room." He passed inside with the maid, who was in fact one of Lestrade's smaller constables, dressed with ludicrous solemnity. I waited until my watch marked the time, then slipped through the side passage to the old counting room. From there I could see Sir Edmund's private door across the court. A single lamp burned within. For half an hour nothing occurred. Then a sound came from above. Not the heavy tread of a policeman, but the light scrape of metal upon stone. A shadow passed across the frosted glass of Sir Edmund's room, though the door remained closed. Someone had entered by the window from the roof. I tightened my grip upon the revolver. Within the room came a faint voice, Holmes's voice disguised as Clara's. A pause. Then another voice answered, soft, cultivated, and faintly amused. "My dear Clara, your uncle is unfortunately detained." The door burst open. I sprang forward as Lestrade's whistle shrilled from the court. Inside the room, Holmes had already cast aside bonnet and veil.
Facing him stood a tall, elegant man in a dark coat, his fair hair touched with silver at the temples, a chrysanthemum in his buttonhole, and a revolver in his hand. Lucien Adair bowed. "Mr. Holmes, I presume. You are less becoming as a young lady than rumour promised." "And you, Mr. Adair, are less invisible than you intended." Adair smiled and fired at the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Chapter 9. Mr. Adair explains too much. The shot that shattered the lamp was followed by a rush of feet, an overturned chair, and Lestrade's cry from the doorway. I fired once towards the window, not at any visible man, but to check his escape. The flash showed Adair already halfway upon the sill, with Holmes close upon him. There are moments in which a room becomes a theatre of lightning. I saw the white flower at Adair's breast, the black rectangle of the window, Holmes's long arm extended, and Lestrade's compact figure plunging across the carpet. Then all was smoke and confusion.
A second constable appeared outside upon the roof. Adair recoiled, and in that instant Holmes seized his wrist. The revolver fell. I heard it strike the floor and spin beneath the desk. Lestrade flung himself upon the intruder's legs. A brief, violent struggle ended with Lucien Adair seated in Sir Edmund's chair, his wrists secured, his composure only slightly ruffled. "Capital," said he, breathing hard. "Quite capital. You have the dramatic instinct, Mr. Holmes." "I learned it from criminals," said Holmes. "They are the most theatrical class in England, after politicians." Lestrade retrieved the packet from the cabinet and opened it. It contained our forged papers and the false scale. Adair looked at it and laughed softly. "You came because you were compelled to know whether it was a toy. That is a stronger force than greed." "And what do you propose to prove? That I climbed into my cousin's office by a window? Trespass, perhaps? Possession of a weapon? Nothing more?" "Nothing more, if Abel Cray had not died. Nothing more, if Sir Edmund Vale were not missing. Nothing more, if Silas Hobb were not already in the hands of the river police." At this, for the first time, Adair's expression changed. It was but a flicker, yet Holmes saw it. "You did not know," said Holmes. "Excellent. You deserted him too soon." Lestrade whispered to me that Hobb had indeed been taken at dawn in a riverside lodging near Shadwell, wounded in the shoulder and cursing all gentlemen. Holmes had received the information while dressing for the trap, but had kept it from us until the proper moment. Adair leaned back. "He is also a coward by nature," said Holmes. "A coward who has been abandoned will sell truth at a discount. That you hired him to make an impression of Sir Edmund's key while disguised as a servant. That you bribed Abel Cray to watch the Gargoyle. That when Cray found one of the marked gold scales loose upon the roof, you feared he might bargain with Sir Edmund instead of you. That you employed Brack to bring down the gilded figure and lured Cray into the court with promises of payment. That you struck him from behind while Hobb extinguished the lamp." Adair's lips thinned. "Then let us supply the fairies with boots, ink, scent, flowers, and ash," said Holmes. "Your narrow boots were found in Hobb's warehouse. Your violet scent is distinctive. Your chrysanthemum was crushed upon the wharf. Your handwriting, when disguised, retains a peculiar upward hook on the letter D. I observed it upon a catalogue note you sent to Sir Edmund last month. The ink upon the Gargoyle messages was Prussian blue mixed with gum, a preparation used by art men for labels and temporary inscriptions. Your cigarette case contains black shag, though you pretend to smoke Turkish tobacco. A pose within a pose, Mr. Adair." Adair gave an elegant shrug. "That," said Holmes, "is the question you will answer."
Holmes bent towards him. You had him in the boat because you needed the last direction. He had discovered, perhaps late, that Peregrine's phrase about the creature upon the roof referred not merely to the hollow gargoyle, but to the separate gilded scales.
You forced him to tell you what he knew. He refused. Therefore you took him to a place where persuasion could be applied without interruption. Adair's eyes glittered. Take care, Mr. Holmes. Imagination is not evidence. For several seconds the two men regarded each other. I have seldom witnessed a more curious duel. Adair, bound and cornered, still sought to rule the scene by coolness. Holmes, spare and keen, watched not his face alone, but the rhythm of his breathing, the direction of his glances, the tiny contractions about the mouth. At last Holmes said very quietly, "He is at the old Venetian glassworks." Adair started no more than a man might at the prick of a pin, but the blood left his face. Lestrade sprang up. "From his flower," said Holmes. "We shall discuss botany later. For the present, bring your men. Watson, your revolver. There is a life yet to be saved." Adair laughed once, but the sound had lost its music. "Possibly," said Holmes, "but I have often found that villains are poorer prophets than they imagine." Chapter 10. The Glassworks by the Thames. The old Venetian glassworks stood beyond Wapping, a ruin of brick furnaces, broken windows and leaning chimneys, where, in former days, coloured glass had been made for churches and great houses. Now it served chiefly as a shelter for rats, smugglers, and those melancholy relics of commerce which linger by the Thames after honest profit has departed. We approached it shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning. The fog had lifted enough to show the river sliding leaden and cold beneath a sky the colour of pewter. Lestrade had brought 4 men. Holmes insisted that they surround the place before any entrance was attempted. "How did the flower tell you?" I asked as we waited behind a wall, black with damp. "The chrysanthemum was dusted not only with violet scent, but with a fine glitter almost invisible. Not gold, powdered glass tinted faintly green. I observed the same upon Adair's glove. There are few places near the river where such powder is common, and fewer still known to dealers in old ornament. Larchen's ledger, before it vanished, contained a partial entry. VGW. I could not place it then. Adair placed it for us by being alarmed. A whistle sounded from the far side. Lestrade's men were ready. Holmes slipped through a broken gate. I followed close behind. Inside the yard, shards of glass crunched underfoot like ice. A crane without its chain leaned above us. The main building had a vast arched doorway, within which darkness breathed coldly. From somewhere inside came a muffled groan. We entered. The great furnace hall was a cavernous chamber, lit by shafts of pale morning through holes in the roof. Old annealing ovens stood like squat tombs along the walls. In the centre, bound to a chair beneath a dangling hook, sat Sir Edmund Vale. His face was bruised, his collar torn, but he was alive. At his side stood Silas Hobb, pale from loss of blood, a pistol trembling in his hand. Holmes raised his hand slightly. "Mr. Hobb, you have been betrayed, arrested, escaped, and wounded within a few hours. You are not at your best. Do not add murder to fatigue." "He said he'd get me clear," Hobb shouted. "Adair said I'd have passage by noon. Instead, the river police were waiting." "Because Adair sent you to be caught. He needed the pursuit turned downstream while he returned to Grafton House." Hobb's face worked horribly. "Ask yourself why he kept the packet and gave you nothing but an empty boat. Ask yourself why the note to the buyer was in his hand, not yours. Ask yourself why he alone knew of the glassworks. Hob wavered. Sir Edmund lifted his head. "Holmes," he whispered. "The scale. He has not found it." A movement sounded above. I looked up. Upon an iron gallery, half hidden by shadow, stood Lucien Adair. How he had escaped the men at Grafton House, I did not then know. Later we learned that he had concealed a thin steel spring in his sleeve, opened his handcuffs during the confusion of departure, and slipped from Lestrade's cab at a crowded crossing. It was an exploit of some daring, and I record it because justice requires that we credit even wicked men with their talents. Adair held a revolver, not at us, but at a chain fastened to the great hook above Sir Edmund's chair. Suspended from that chain was a heavy iron mould, rusted but massive. "One step," he called, "and Sir Edmund is crushed." Lestrade, entering behind us, froze. Holmes looked up calmly. "Your position is picturesque, Mr. Adair, but unsound. You cannot shoot all of us, and you cannot depart with the cipher." "I can depart without it, if everyone here departs life before me." Adair's face darkened. Sir Edmund closed his eyes. Holmes answered for him. Adair stared. "Grip, Abel Cray's terrier. Colonel Peregrine Vale trusted Stone, but he trusted a soldier's joke more. The first mark, St. Mark, was upon the scale. The second, in the eastern Gargoyle, pointed to the faithful mouth that never speaks. The dog that did not bark, Mr. Adair. You removed Grip because you feared the animal. You did not know you were removing the answer." For an instant, all were silent. Then Adair gave a cry and fired. The bullet struck near Holmes's foot. At the same moment, Hob, distracted and terrified, turned his pistol towards the gallery. I sprang at him. The shot went wide. Holmes dashed forward, seized Sir Edmund's chair, and dragged it backward with a strength born of urgency. Adair fired at the chain. The iron mould plunged down, smashing the chair where Sir Edmund had sat an instant before, and sending splinters across the floor. Lestrade's men rushed the gallery stairs. Adair fled along the iron walk, which trembled beneath him. Holmes pursued from below, cutting across the furnace hall to intercept him at the far descent. I helped Sir Edmund to his feet and thrust him towards safety. The chase that followed was as desperate as any in my records. Adair leapt from the gallery to a stack of crates, scrambled through a broken window, and emerged upon a narrow exterior ledge above the river. Holmes followed with the agility of a hunting cat. Lestrade and I reached the yard below in time to see the two men silhouetted against a pale sky. "Come back!" cried Lestrade. "In the Queen's name!" Adair laughed and ran along the ledge towards an old crane beam which projected over the water. Holmes gained upon him. At the beam, Adair turned, raised his revolver, and found it empty. Holmes stood 10 paces away. "Not while there is water below," said Adair. He stepped backward onto the beam. The rotten timber groaned. Holmes moved forward. Adair's smile returned, ghastly and brilliant. "My dear Holmes, I have been a fool since I first mistook cleverness for courage." The beam cracked. Adair tried to spring, but the wood gave way beneath him. He fell into the Thames with a splash and vanished among the broken piles. Men ran for ropes. A boat was launched from the neighbouring wharf. We searched for 20 minutes, then 40. Nothing rose but bubbles and black driftwood. Whether Lucien Adair drowned that morning or was swept wounded into some foul refuge of the river, I cannot state with certainty. Holmes never accepted his death without reservation. For my part, I saw the Thames close over him, and it seemed to me that London had swallowed back one of its own shadows. Chapter 11. The Last Scale.
It remained only to complete the chain of reasoning and recover the object for which Abel Cray had died. We returned to Grafton House, bearing Sir Edmund between us, more shaken in spirit than in body. Miss Vale met him in the hall. The stern old gentleman, whose pride had furnished our enemy with so many opportunities, broke down at the sight of her and clasped her hands without a word. Even Adrian Pike, pale and anxious in the background, was not rebuked.
"Later," said Sir Edmund hoarsely. "All reproaches later."
Holmes, however, allowed no sentiment to delay the business of the case. Grip, the dead watchman's terrier, had been kept in the coal cellar since the first night, where he had been fed by the porter and much petted by the clerks. He greeted us with extravagant delight, quite unaware that he had become an archive of imperial importance. Holmes knelt before the animal and examined the brass plate upon his collar. "Grip," he read. "Property of Abel Cray, Grafton House." The dog opened his mouth in a friendly pant. Holmes laughed softly. "Not his living mouth, Watson. The mouth that never speaks." He turned the brass plate over. Its back was scratched and dented, but ordinary. Then he examined the leather near the buckle. Within a stitched fold, so neatly made that I had missed it entirely, lay a tiny flattened tube of gold, scarcely larger than a quill. Upon it was engraved the image of a winged lion. Sir Edmund gave a cry. "Peregrine's hand. I remember that mark upon his signet." Holmes opened the tube with delicate care. Inside was a roll of thin paper covered in rows of letters and numbers. Mycroft, who had arrived in answer to a telegram, took it with an expression of profound satisfaction. "St. Mark," said he. "The missing cipher key. You have rendered a considerable service, Sherlock. Pray do not mention it in any official document. You may rely upon the government for ingratitude. An institution in which I have complete confidence." Lestrade, who had listened with increasing impatience,
demanded the full explanation. Holmes obliged him that evening at Baker Street, where the principal persons in the drama had assembled. Sir Edmund sat near the fire, Miss Vale beside him, and Pike at a respectful distance, until Sir Edmund, with a gruff motion, indicated that he might sit nearer. Lestrade stood by the mantel, notebook in hand. Mycroft occupied the largest chair and appeared to fill half the room. Holmes began with the Gargoyle scale upon the table. Colonel Peregrine Vale, returning from India in 1879, possessed the St. Mark cipher key. For reasons of honour or fear, he concealed it rather than destroy it. He chose the Gilded Gargoyle at Grafton House because it was ancient, inaccessible, and already associated in family jest with a beast that watched but did not speak. He placed within the hollow figure certain silk-wrapped papers, but the true key he hid elsewhere, marking directions upon the inner sides of several removable gold scales. Sir Edmund bowed his head. My brother spoke of it in fever. I thought him wandering. Quite naturally. Years later, Abel Cray, who patrolled the building, noticed a loosened gilded scale. Perhaps weather detached it. Perhaps Hobb, already searching under Adair's orders, disturbed it. Cray found the words St. Mark. Not understanding them, he hinted that he had found something in the gold beast. Adair heard through Hobb and saw his opportunity. "Why Adair?" asked Miss Vale. Holmes turned to her gently. "He had family access, knowledge of your uncle's papers, and debts which made treachery attractive. He moved in circles where foreign buyers might be found. His taste for Eastern curiosities brought him into contact with Larchin's warehouse and with Silas Hobb, a gilder and forger. He arranged first to obtain the memorandum from Sir Edmund's cabinet by taking an impression of the key. Miss Vale saw him disguised as a scarred servant, though she took him for an errand man. The scar belonged in truth to Hob, whose appearance Adair borrowed enough to confuse testimony. "Hob wrote the notes?" asked Lestrade. "Hob prepared some, Adair others. Both used the same Prussian blue ink and fish glue from the warehouse, which is why the papers smelled alike. The crude drawing of the gargoyle was meant to lure Cray and frighten Sir Edmund. The black shag ash pointed to Hob, but not to Adair, who carried it precisely in order that suspicion might rest upon his tool if necessary. "And Pike," said Lestrade, with a glance at the young secretary. "Mr. Pike was guilty of love, debt, concealment, and bad judgment. These are common crimes, but not always punishable by hanging. His dawn visit to recover Miss Vale's letter made him appear suspicious. The blue ink in his rooms was different from the criminal ink. His handwriting lacked the repeated error and the trained disguise. He was our first false trail." Pike flushed, while Miss Vale gave him a look in which reproach and tenderness were mingled. "The second false trail," Holmes continued, "was the suggestion that Sir Edmund himself had hidden or sold the papers. His pride, secrecy, and control over Miss Vale's fortune made him appear capable of dark dealing. In truth, he concealed ignorance, not guilt. He knew less than he feared others supposed." Sir Edmund managed a dry smile. Abel Cray was lured into the court by the promise of payment. Jonas Brack, the dock worker with the patched boot, was hired to pull down the prepared gargoyle. The wire saw marks upon the base showed that the fall was arranged, not accidental. Cray was struck behind the ear by Adair, who stood in the passage while Hob managed the lamp and cord. The dog Grip did not bark because he had been locked away by someone familiar with the premises or supplied with food. That fact told me the murderer had knowledge of the house. "And the eastern gargoyle?" asked I. "The packet hidden there was an intermediate clue. Adair could not retrieve it under police watch, so he invented the second mouth message and made us open it for him. By shooting at us and seizing the packet, he gained what he believed to be the final step. Yet it did not suffice. The directions, when interpreted with Colonel Vale's old phrase, led to the faithful mouth. Adair did not understand this until too late, and so he seized Sir Edmund, hoping to force from him the family recollection." Mycroft unfolded the recovered cipher with his heavy fingers. "The key shall now be retired properly. Several old servants of the Crown may sleep easier." Lestrade closed his notebook. "If the river gives him up, you may charge him," said Holmes. "If it does not, charge Hob and Brack according to their parts. Hob will speak. Brack did not strike the blow. Cray's murderer was Adair." At this, Mrs. Hudson entered with a tray, and having placed it upon the table, observed with quiet satisfaction that the little dog had behaved better than most gentlemen. Holmes laughed. "Mrs. Hudson, you have stated the moral of the case." Chapter 12. The Creature Upon the Roof. Several weeks passed before I set down the concluding notes of the affair. The public knew little of its true nature. The newspapers reported the death of Abel Cray, the arrest of a criminal gilder named Silas Hob, and the disappearance of Mr. Lucien Adair, art adviser, whose accounts proved to be in a condition of deplorable confusion. The diplomatic aspect was, by Mycroft's invisible machinery, removed from the public gaze. I have changed certain names and particulars in this account, though the central facts remain as I observed them. Jonas Brack received a sentence for his part in the business, mitigated by his testimony and by the plain fact that he had not known murder was intended. Hobb, after much bluster and more trembling, confessed enough to ensure his own ruin and to confirm Holmes's deductions in every essential. He swore to the last that Adair had promised him passage abroad, and that he had never meant the watchman to die. It is a poor comfort to the dead when villains discover, after the event, the limits of their intentions. Sir Edmund Vale recovered slowly from his ordeal. The shock altered him. He became less rigid, less proud, and, as Holmes put it, more human in his errors. Before Christmas, he consented to the engagement of Clara Vale and Adrian Pike, though he insisted that the young man first put his finances in order. Pike, to his credit, accepted the condition with gratitude rather than resentment. One afternoon, not long after the first snow had whitened the roofs of Marylebone, I found Holmes standing at our window, looking down upon Baker Street. The lamps were being lit, and the winter dusk had drawn a veil of violet over the house fronts. Upon the mantel lay the bent golden scale from the Gargoyle, returned to Holmes by Mycroft with the official thanks of no one in particular. "You are thinking of Adair," said I. Holmes drew his bow across the violin strings, producing a soft, mournful note. "The Thames is a wide road, Watson. Men have travelled farther upon worse conveyances. Yet whether Adair lives in some foreign port under another name, or lies in the mud among broken bottles and black timbers, the principle remains the same. That vanity is the gilding of crime. It catches the eye, dazzles the foolish, and persuades the criminal that he is a figure of art rather than a creature of appetite. But scratch it with a needle, and beneath the gold one finds the same old stone." I picked up the scale and examined the tiny words. St. Mark. How strange that such slight scratches upon a hidden surface should have drawn men across London, from club to warehouse, from roof to river, from deception to death. "The Gargoyle guarded its secret well," said I. Holmes smiled. "Better than the men did. Stone has one advantage over humanity. It does not talk unless compelled by logic." The fire settled with a sigh. Outside, a hansom rolled past, its wheels muffled by snow. Somewhere below, Mrs. Hudson reproved a delivery boy, and the familiar domestic sound seemed a pleasing answer to the grim echoes of the river. I thought of Abel Cray, a humble watchman whose curiosity had placed him between old imperial secrets and modern greed. I thought of Grip wagging his tail while statesmen fretted over the collar at his throat. I thought too of Miss Vale, who had shown more courage than many men, and of Sir Edmund, who had learned that concealment may become a door through which danger enters. Holmes, perceiving perhaps the direction of my thoughts, laid aside his violin. "You see, Watson, the affair was never about a gargoyle. It was about what men hide and where. One hides a cipher in a dog's collar, another hides love in a desk. A third hides debt behind elegance. A fourth hides ignorance beneath authority. Our labour is merely to determine which concealment is innocent, which foolish, and which fatal." His eyes twinkled. "My dear Watson, I hide my tobacco in a Persian slipper, and my impatience with mankind wherever I can. Neither hiding place is entirely successful." It was late when I closed my journal. The fog had lifted, and a clear moon shone upon the rooftops. I fancied, absurdly perhaps, that upon some distant parapet a stone beast crouched, with its mouth open, not in menace, but in laughter at the follies of men below. And so concludes Sherlock Holmes and the Riddle of the Gilded Gargoyle. Beneath its gilded surface lay a tale of pride, secrecy, loyalty, and greed, in which the smallest mark upon a hidden scale outweighed the loudest accusation. Once again, Sherlock Holmes has demonstrated that truth is seldom silent, provided one knows where to listen. Until next time, keep your wits sharp. The game is all